Hi, class. In this chapter, we are talking about social cognition. So let's start with the definition for social cognition. It is the study of how people come to believe what they do. How you explain, how you remember, predict, make decisions, and evaluate yourself as well as other people, and how these processes can be so prone to error. You tend to screw up what you are thinking. Do it inaccurately. For social cognition, you have cognitive and social limitations. So, for example, there is this idea that we're made for small hunter-gatherer groups. And because our way of thinking evolved back in the time when you just had this small community, the way we think doesn't work very well in our more global, multicultural world. One way we tend to screw things up is that we use reasons and facts to confirm what we already think, rather than creating our opinions and beliefs from the facts. And we'll go more into details on that specific type of error later this chapter. As we think about how our brains evolved versus how they're used today, there's a few theorists that have looked into this. Jeremy Bentham, who lived in the 1700s, 1748 to 1832, said that people decide the moral status, if something is right or wrong, of their behavior, their choices, by creating a happiness calculation. And so you want maximum pleasure with minimum pain. And the role of the government, as well as economic systems, is to ensure the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Basically, this is the basis for modern capitalism. There are two reasons that not everyone uses this happiness calculation. Not everyone thinks like this. One is that we don't have a God's eye view of the world. So we're not all-knowing, we're not free from bias. We have limited or misleading information that we're using to make this calculation, so we can screw it up. And then number two is we don't have time to actually do a complete calculation, to analyze every problem and every decision as much as you would need to if this is the way we tended to have things work out. Another big issue is that we're cognitive misers. We try to conserve cognitive energy. We try to simplify complex things by taking shortcuts, using rules of thumbs. We'll talk about heuristics later this chapter. We get too tired or too lazy to do all of the thinking that we need to do. So there are some problems here. When we think about how thinking about thinking has evolved, there are a few different perspectives you should know: tabula rasa, the genetic predisposition, and the sketchpad theory. Tabula rasa was created by John Locke. By the way, before we do these, your book talks about some other perspectives like Plato, the telegraph idea, switchboard, or computer idea. We are not covering these. These are the three you need to know. These are the ones that need to be in your notes. So tabula rasa is the idea that you start as a blank slate. Your mind is a blank slate. And that means that your mind, your thinking, is totally shaped by your experiences, by the learning that takes place. This is related to some theories you've learned about, like in your intro psychology class. This would be the basis for theories like behaviorism, Watson and Skinner's behaviorism, or Freud's psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic perspective. Those would believe more of this tabula rasa idea, that you're a blank slate and it is your environment that determines how you think, who you are. Sort of on the other extreme is the genetic predisposition idea. And this says that you are pre-programmed with your moral intuitions and the ability to make moral distinctions. So you are born with your thinking, and then you apply it as you go. One experiment that looks sort of at this genetic predisposition side was done by Bloom, where they had 3-month-olds who saw a puppet show, and in the puppet show, one of the puppets was really helpful and nice, and another was really hostile and mean. And at the end of the puppet show, the 3-month-olds were allowed to grab for one of the puppets. Which puppet do you want? According to Tabula Rasa, the kids would just randomly choose, because at 3 months they haven't had enough life experiences to create a moral compass. But even at 3 months old, these babies were grabbing for the nice puppet instead of the mean one. Even at 3 months old, they had this moral idea: this is the good puppet, that is the bad puppet. This is the way you should act. So that goes to this idea that you're sort of born with a preconceived way of thinking. Sort of a middle ground between these two extremes is the sketchpad idea. And this says that you are born with a general outline, a general way of thinking, but it's like a blank coloring page. And your experiences add the color, add the detail, elaborate on the small basis that is already there. So this tends to be the perspective that a lot of people take now. You might have a general outline, but it's your lived experience that provides all of the extra details. Another thing to think about is the hunter-gatherer perspective. Robin, the idea that, before we get into Dunbar, the idea that your traits and behaviors that were rewarded, that helped with survival, are going to be passed down to the next generation. So Robin Dunbar has done research on this, and he found that groups or species that had larger groups, that lived in larger packs, communities, had a larger neocortex. Basically, this neocortex helps with self-awareness, self-control, language, conscious thought, all the things you need in order to have a peaceful, thriving community. So having this larger neocortex, because humans have a big one, helps with forming large cooperative groups, helps you transmit knowledge through culture, helps you to not have conflict and break apart. However, there are limits to this. It's about 150. If a group gets larger than 150, that is too large for the abilities of our neocortex. If you are going to have a stable, meaningful interaction in your group, it needs to be 150 or less. It cannot be bigger than about 150. So this is the limit that evolved way back in the hunter-gatherer days. That limit still applies today. If you look at organizations, if you look at groups, you are not going to have meaningful interactions that are harmonious if that group is larger than 150. You will find ways to break that group up. Even if you think, like here at McDaniel, yes, there might be more than 150 people at the school, but we find ways to break it down smaller. Your group is not the whole school. It's the people in your major, the people on your sports team, the people on the floor of your dorm. You find smaller groups, that's who you're really interacting with. But at 150 is about the limit. If it's larger than that, it's not going to go well. Another thing that has sort of evolved is human universals. These are traits, behavioral tendencies, motivations, and emotional systems that all humans manifest regardless of their culture. I'll go through examples first. Examples of human universals are things like facial expressions. Smile when you're happy, you frown when you're sad. You prefer your kin, your relatives, to strangers. You live in a family unit. Most of the time, the head of that family unit is going to be an older male from the family. Men tend to be more physically aggressive than females. You tend to have gendered activity. This is what the males do. This is what the females do. Generally speaking, females get put in charge of childcare. Your religion, your taboos, your norms of how you're supposed to act, your rites of passage, these are all going to be human universals. And one tricky thing is that things that were helpful in the past, like rites of passage or norms of behavior, aren't necessarily helpful today. For example, women being in charge of childcare. There is no reason in our modern society that the majority of that work in the family unit needs to be put on the female, but it's something that has tended to be passed down, and so it's the way it tends to be even today. So one question I have for you is, what is a human universal, so, something that is visible in more than just our culture, our society? What is a human universal that you can think of? Okay. Next thing to go over is some biases that we have. And let's go through some of these definitions. Actually, let me move me up here. You have your bias blind spot. That is the belief that you're more objective, you are less biased than most other people. We tend to think we are less susceptible to these biases than the average person. That is not true. This is because many beliefs operate implicitly, so we can't see them, but we see others' behavior that's based on their beliefs, and so it's easier to judge. We tend to think we are less biased than most people. That is not true. Naive realism is another bias. This is our propensity to believe that our subjective interpretation of reality is reality. If someone else sees things differently, we assume it's because they're misguided. They are the wrong ones. It is not us. If we think it, that is the most obvious reality. Confirmation bias is when you notice, remember, and accept information that confirms what you already believe. You ignore, you forget, and you reject information that disconfirms what you believe. There's so many examples of this. There's a lot of examples of this. Like, you can see this a lot when it comes to politics during an election season. People who, whatever candidate you want to win, you are going to notice, you're going to read all the stories that confirm that they're the best candidate and they're on track to win. You're not going to notice, you're going to ignore the articles, the polls, whatever, that show that your candidate might be struggling. You see this with COVID, with the vaccine. If you are pro-vaccine, you're going to notice things like stats about how people who have the vaccine are less likely to die or get seriously ill. You won't notice facts about how it's not the most effective at preventing contracting COVID, just preventing disease. If you are anti the COVID vaccine, you are going to focus on any case you hear of someone having a reaction, or the cases you hear of people who are vaccinated who still get sick. You're going to ignore the statistics about the significantly larger percentage of people dying who are unvaccinated versus vaccinated. You're only going to focus on the info that proves that your opinion is the best one. This also works for more minor things. For example, Snyder and Swan did an experiment where they with female college students, and they were told, hey, you're going to go interview this person. Half the time they were told they were interviewing an extrovert. Half of the time they thought they were interviewing an introvert. If they thought they were interviewing an extrovert, they would ask questions that confirmed that belief. Like, do you have fun going to parties? I don't know. Do you enjoy talking to new people? They asked things that got them the proof they wanted that this person's an extrovert. Same thing if they were talking to an introvert. It changed what questions they asked, what facts they were trying to get, so that it backed up their opinion on whether this person was an introvert or an extrovert. The next bias, egocentric bias, and these next ones kind of fall under that umbrella of egocentric bias. Egocentric bias is the fact that we are biased towards ourselves. We think about ourselves more. We care more about information that affects us. You're in school in Maryland, you're going to be, if something really important happens in Maryland, you're going to focus on it. If something really big happened in North Dakota, unless you're from North Dakota, you're not going to care. You're not going to notice about it. So you notice things, you pay attention to things that are more relevant to you. The spotlight effect says that we think people care more about us than they actually do. And I'm going to define cloak of invisibility, and then I'm going to help you distinguish them. They kind of seem contradictory. So let me define that, and then I'll give you an example to show sort of how both these things can exist. So spotlight effect, you think people care about you, notice you more than they actually do. Cloak of invisibility says that we feel that we notice and observe others more than they notice us. So how can other people care about you when you notice them more? It depends on whether something wonky has gone on. If you have something weird about you, that is when the spotlight effect comes into play. For example, they did an experiment where they had participants walk around all day in a Barry Manilow t-shirt. And Barry Manilow is a musician, a pianist, and he's got a large nose. Y'all wouldn't be walking around in a Barry Manilow shirt. So they put these people in a Barry Manilow shirt all day, so there is now something weird about them. At the end of the day, they said, what percentage of people that you interacted with today do you think noticed or cared about the t-shirt you were wearing? 50% is what the participants said. The participants thought that about 50% of people noticed or cared that they were walking around in a Barry Manilow shirt, when in fact only 20% actually noticed their shirt. So they thought 50% noticed, only 20% did. That's that spotlight effect. There's something weird about me. I know everyone is thinking about it. Everyone is focused on it too. The cloak of invisibility, if there's nothing weird about you, that's when you think you're the observant one more than other people. So in an experiment connected with that, they had people estimate, they were in a waiting room with a stranger, they had people estimate whether they paid more attention to the stranger in the waiting room or whether the stranger noticed them more. And on average, the participants said they are the ones that paid more attention to the stranger than the stranger paid attention to them. If nothing weird's happening, you are the observant one. The exception to that in this experiment, when they did a version of it where they made the participants wear a Pablo Escobar shirt, now there is something weird, then it was reversed. Then they assumed the stranger noticed them more than they were looking at the stranger because they've got this weird shirt on. So if there's something weird, spotlight effect. If there's nothing weird, that's when you get the cloak of invisibility. And then next you have the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect is when people are given vague, all-purpose descriptions of themselves that could apply to almost anyone, they assume they're accurate. The Barnum effect, examples of this is like astrology. If you read your horoscope and you're like, oh my goodness, that's so me. No, it's not. It would apply to anyone. Or you'll see this like BuzzFeed quizzes that you'll see online, and it'll, answer these questions and it'll tell you, I don't don't know, what Disney princess you are or whatever they do. At the end, you're like, oh, that works. No matter what they'd chosen, you would have found a way to have it apply to you. So that is the Barnum effect. And so one more example of Barnum effect would be fortune tellers. So or psychics, people who, get in a big room and they're like, someone is calling to me from beyond the grave. They will give very general information that could apply to almost anyone who has had a loved one die. Their name has an A in it and they really liked baseball. Everyone's going to be able to think of some long gone grandparent or great grandparent who that could apply to. And so you think it's really about you. It's general, but you apply it to yourself. So that is the Barnum effect. A couple more issues for this one, and then we will stop. The next thing is bad versus good. So, question for you. How would you get people to spend money on insulation? If you were trying to get people to invest money to insulate their house better, would it work better if you focus on how much money they'll save if they do it? Or is it going to be more effective to focus on how much money they are losing because they are not doing it? The answer is focusing on how much money they're losing because they are not doing it. This connects to the negativity bias. We tend to focus more on potential threats, than potential blessings, potential positive things. Examples of this. If you are scanning a crowd, you notice an angry face faster than you notice a smiling face. If you get feedback, like if you get job review or something like that, it is easier later on to remember the negative feedback rather than the positive feedback. For example, I've been teaching at colleges now for, 15 years. And my very first semester teaching full-time, I was at College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts. And a student in my class on my end of the semester evaluations said that she's great or something, but she sounds like Minnie Mouse and she really needs to work on her voice. It's been 15 years. I still remember that student who felt the need to tell me my voice isn't good enough and needs to change. I can't tell you any specific positive feedback from that first year of teaching, even though basically all the feedback was positive. But I remember the one negative comment that a student made about my voice. That is that negativity bias. It sticks in your head better when something negative happens. If you win the lottery, or conversely, if you lose a lot of money somehow, eventually your happiness returns to baseline, returns back to normal. If you win the lottery, you're really happy. Eventually, you come back down. If you lose a lot of money, eventually you come back up. However, it takes longer to get back to that baseline if you've lost the money. You return back to normal faster if something really good happens. You win the lottery than it does if something bad happens, like losing lots of money. And this relates to something that Baumeister said, which is that if you have a heightened awareness to danger, to threats, to pains, you're more likely to survive. The people who notice that something bad is about to happen are more easily able to stop, get away from that bad thing, and survive the situation. This also connects to loss aversion. Loss aversion is when given a choice, people are more likely to try to avoid a loss rather than try to achieve a gain. And so this connects with that insulation thing. You're losing money. You want to avoid that. That matters more than here's all the money you're going to get. Another example is James Holzhauer, who was the Jeopardy champ who won the most money in Jeopardy history. And the way he was able to do that, a big way that he sort of got a bunch of money in his matches or games, whatever they call them, is that he would bet large amounts of money. He would bet more than most people. For example, with daily doubles, which you're allowed to bet up to twice what you have in your bank so far. Most people don't do that. Most people are not willing to potentially go into debt on those daily doubles. He would. He would bet the max. He did not have the loss aversion that the average person did. And so that is how he was able to get such high gains, is because he was more comfortable with risking a potential loss. It goes back to the fact that he's a sports gambler in Vegas, and so he sort of got rid of that whole loss aversion through that job. But if he wasn't averse to the loss, he had that greater potential for gain. But the average person is not willing to do that. And so I'm going to talk about one more thing, one more slide, and then we'll be done with this video. Automatic and controlled processing. Your mind's two thinking systems. You have automatic processing, which is unconscious, it's involuntary operations that guide most of our behaviors. And then you have controlled processing. This is conscious effort we make in dealing with new problems. Controlled processing, as compared to automatic processing, is slower and it's more sequential. You take your time, you go through a specific process. When we are making a decision, there are usually two steps involved. The first one is that automatic system. It's going to give you a quick, simple assessment. If you have the time, you're motivated to do it, you have the access to the information, that is when you will go through that controlled process and potentially modify your initial impression. Because that controlled process takes time and effort, however, it is subject to fatigue and distraction. And so we tend to just go with that automatic process, that initial assessment, and we don't make the effort to go through that controlled process. When you're doing the controlled process, you can't do multitasking. You can't do two things at once. All of your energy has to go towards that process. And so that's why we tend to use the automatic processing. We don't think through our decisions as much as people assume. And that is where I will stop for this video.